Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest we'd like to welcome to the podcast. He's an insanely funny comedian and podcaster who's worked with some of the biggest names in comedy, such as Bert Kreischer, Jim Gaffigan, Jimmy Fallon, and my personal favorite comedian of all time, Lewis Black. He's
Ah,
performed and won more comedy festivals and competitions than I can even count. Follow him on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Head over to DaveWilliamsonComedy.com for everything he's got going on. Ladies and gentlemen, comedian extraordinaire Dave Williamson. Dave, how are we doing, my man?
hey, it's me, guys. It's me. Thanks for having me on. Comedy festivals are such a funny thing, man. Like, because comedy normally, and so that they actually can sell tickets and make it interesting, they do it like a competition standpoint, But comedy is not supposed to be subjective. You know what I mean? You're,
Yes.
you're not supposed to like judge one comic versus the other and have a scorecard and whatever. But it just sells tickets, so they all do it. But for me, like I come from a sports background, like being a sports fan and also playing sports and coaching sports now, that I would get so competitive at those things, and it's so unhealthy. It's
Yeah.
so unhealthy with
Yeah.
jokes,
Would imagine.
So, so it was so funny. Like I think because of that, I got really good at making the finals of almost every comedy festival I've ever been in, because I prepare, I take it seriously, I don't let people get in my head. I like, oh, there's industry here, so there's stakes, and like some comics are like freaking out about that. I'm like, game face on. But on that same token, I think it's made it hard for me to win many fests,
Yeah.
because I just get too competitive. You have to be loosey goosey with comedy, like you can't be competing. So it's funny. I've made the finals, but I don't think I've really won many of them.
Yeah,
Oh,
you kind of think the competition is kind of the opposite of comedy. You're trying to go out
yeah.
there, have fun with it, and like competition is like you're going against somebody and you're trying to like destroy the other person.
Yeah, no doubt. And I don't know, man. Like I think too, if you take it too seriously, like the goal should be that you end up just having a good showing
Yeah.
and getting along with everyone and being easy to work with and having a point of view. If you go up there trying to kill too bad, then you're gonna like fall back on like a hacky jokes that work,
Yup.
and you're playing to the crowd instead of playing to the industry. Like, I guess what I mean is, and this is gonna sound like coach speak, sometimes you could lose the competition, but really be the big winner of the
Yes.
festival, because you're the guy who ends up getting the most work out of it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So you could win the whole thing by having some hacky jokes that the crowd loved, but the booker might recognize, like, oh, that guy who came in third place actually had a point of view. He had jokes I'm going to remember. He connected with the audience, even though he didn't get bigger laughs. So you could be a loser at those festivals and actually be a winner, which I started looking at it like that. I'd go to those festivals and I'd just be like, yeah, I want to do good in the show, but more importantly, I want to have beers with the bookers and get to
Yup.
know them. But if you're a bitch and you're like, I came in second place and I should have come in first, and this place is rigged, no one's gonna give you work. Who wants to deal with that?
Exactly,
Yeah, you
for
kind you
sure.
kind of use it as an interview.
100%,
Yeah,
hundred
that's
percent.
Love it.
awesome.
Love it. Hey, and one of your albums, you talked about traveling the country in an RV with your wife and your two kids. Do you ever miss that, being out in the RV with the whole family?
Man, that was the best time of my life, and
That's so cool.
I say that like not just like as hyperbole. Like, I had such a blast doing that, and it was a huge risk, because when my wife and when she greenlit it and we like started putting it together, and I'm like, oh my god, this is happening. We're doing it, right? Uh, I was like, I was like, man, I think 2 weeks in, I'm gonna know whether this was an awesome idea or a terrible idea. This is either gonna be like build the foundation for my family forever, or we're gonna be divorced. you know.
Yeah, for sure.
And lucky for me, man, it really ended up being awesome. I have a great wife who's a good sport and always up for adventure. And it really ended up being something that was a positive influence or impact on my family. And I really missed those days. We were supposed to go for 3 months, and then I got into the San Francisco comedy competition, which if you do well, you end up competing in the San Fran area for a month.
Mhm.
So I made the finals of that. So we were there for a month. So it ended up being 4 months. And then the idea was we were moving from Miami to LA, and we were going to work the road on the way. Right. So I booked up all this work, and then that festival tacked on the end of it. And then we got into LA, and my wife looked at me and she goes, I'm kind of sad because we're just starting to get really good at this. I don't know if I'm ready to stop traveling yet. So I go, all right. So I actually sold it to Nick Mom, which was a channel that Nickelodeon had at the time.
Yo.
And I sold it as a web series to them. So we ended up we continued going. So we ended up living in that 25-foot travel trailer for 18 months. We were in it for a year and a half.
Oh my
Wow.
God, that is so cool. And like
That's
with,
awesome.
I don't know, like on Instagram, like in TikTok, I've seen so many people that are like moving out of their apartments and traveling the world in RV. You were like ahead of that trend, man.
Dude, we were totally on the front end of that, man. Yeah, it's especially now, like we were like cars didn't have Wi-Fi yet,
Yeah.
and like cell phones were, because I did it in 2012, so everyone had an iPhone yet, but it was like the iPhone like 2, you know, like
Yeah.
it was like the early years of that shit. So it's a lot easier now for people to hop in, go, and look up campsites on their phone and work from their laptop with a satellite signal. You know, it was a little harder then, but because of my job as a comedian, we can do it.
That's so cool,
That's
man.
awesome. I've always, like, as a kid, I always wanted an RV, and that just seems awesome to just travel the world and like
18
Like
months.
you just know, like you're in an RV, like I can just pull over at any gas station or something like that, and I can just sleep there.
That was the best part, is that like, so most gigs, it really was good for me as a comedian too, because I was like headlining at the time, but I was just starting to headline like B rooms. So this is how it happened. I'll tell you the whole story. I was actually at a festival. I was at the World Series of Comedy in Las Vegas, which is like straight up a competition.
Yeah.
And like 400 or 500 people apply to it, and they invite 101 to come to Vegas, and then they whittle it down through rounds after round, and I ended up coming in third place that year. So it was funny because the finals were me and two of my closest friends in comedy. So when all three of us made the finals, we were like, dude, we've already won. Like, like I was gonna be happy for any of them that got it, So the way it works was there was a bunch of industry that was there to judge it, because this guy who was putting it together in Vegas, if he calls up some comedy club owner in Iowa and says, hey man, you want a free weekend in Vegas, all you got to do is show up at these shows and fill out a scorecard, and then you can have the rest of the day and the rest of the night off. Every comedy club booker in the world is gonna be like, yeah, we'll take that. So there's all these club bookers that were there. So I went, I did well, and while I was there, I met a guy who was traveling with his family in an RV, but he was doing it for like 2 weeks, which at the time I was like, 2 weeks, that's a long time, bro. So I won all this work, and my wife and I were at the same time like trying to figure out like, how are we going to make a transition from Miami to LA? So I come home and I go, babe, I got this crazy idea. I go, I just won all this work from this festival. What if I see if I could actually put it together? Do you want to get rid of our house and buy an RV and travel? And she was like, yeah, I'm in, let's do it. So I started hitting up. Some of the work was only guaranteed for first place. Some of the work was only guaranteed for second place. Some of the work was only guaranteed for third place. So I went ahead and I emailed like all 100 email addresses. And I said, I came in third place. I know you're only offering work to first place, but please consider me if you need a comedian. And also, I'm more of a headliner than an opening act. So, if you have headlining work, that'd be great, which was a little bit of a stretch of the truth. I was barely a headliner at the time, but I knew I could do it. So of those 100 emails, if half of them hit me back, they're like, all right, we'll consider it, but, what send us your avails. And I go, well, look, if you send it, if you book me this particular weekend in July, then you don't have to give me a hotel. And that was my leverage. Because these comedy clubs, a lot of them at that level, if they could save $200 a weekend on hotels, they'll take it because they're cheap, at that level.
Absolutely.
So they were like, all right, we'll take it. So I was working for like the entry level headlining fee, and I was saving money on hotel, but I was getting my foot in the door. I was being able to travel and work with my family. I went in and crushed it and did a good job. I brought like a flea market of merch with me, so I'd sell merch afterwards. And then I would do shows Thursday through Sunday in whatever city we were in. And then we'd have, 2 or 3 days to kind of cruise, stop at places and check things out. And then I had to be whatever the next city was by the next Thursday.
That is so cool, man.
That's genius way of thinking about it too. Like, like, oh, it's just, this comedian, whatever. But then when you put out the oh, no hotel. Like that's just another add-on just another reason for them to go in. And then you said you go in and crush it, and then they know you.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, life is all about getting your foot in the door places, just like anything, you know. And when I would go to these festivals too, like you got to pay your own way to these festivals. You know, when you get to the bigger festival, Montreal or whatever, or you're like a famous comedian, then they might pay for your stuff or give you hotel rooms. But when you're just trying to like be seen, you know, it's like being an athlete in the minor league system or a high school. So you got it being seen or people knowing who you are is like half the battle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Name
everyone's
recognition.
talented. It's just like standing out from the rest.
For
So
sure.
so instead of emailing Link out and spending all this time like trying to get people on the phone or whatever, I just decided to go to these festivals. So when I really made the decision to be a full-time comic, I told my wife, I go, look, it's financially not going to be smart. I go, but I think in the long term it's going to pay off. So that's why, you know, in my bio, I have so many festivals I went to. I applied to all of them, and any of the ones I got in, I went. You know?
Yeah. That is so cool, man. I've been a big stand-up. My mom and dad used to listen to Bill Engvall CDs when I was like, you know, 5 and 6 years old. And like before I could even like count to 10, I had those CDs like memorized. I've been a comedy fan for well over 25 years of my life. So that's so cool to hear how that works out.
And Bill Engvall. I would go. I tweeted at Larry the Cable Guy last night, and he responded. I thought that was kind of cool.
That is very cool.
But I would go out to hunting camps with my dad and all his buddies in Florida, and we'd be out in the middle of the swamp in some hunting camp, and they would have a boombox with Andrew Dice Clay cassettes on it. They would just play it on loop, and I'd see these like men that I like, you know, that I looked up to, who were like, you know, good old boys and real like, you know, serious guys. And I'd sit there, they'd listen to it 5 times and they'd still be laughing at the jokes. And that's when I was like, man, I want to be the guy who makes them laugh and smile, you know?
So kind of going into that, like, were you big in like comedy growing up, and like, who were some of your favorite comedians?
Other than Dice or any of those guys your dad listened to?
Well, I mean, stand-up, I wasn't as influenced by stand-up as a kid as many people, other than like, you know, seeing my parents listen to Dice. And I remember my parents went to a Gallagher concert when he was like humongous, you know, they got like front row seats and yeah, it had the parkas so they could so it wasn't really the comedy though that like influenced me. It was more parents' reaction to the comedy, I think. But I was really into Saturday Night Live. I loved Saturday Night Live as a kid. And so Dana Carvey was like so like the popular guy when I was like in junior high. So I just thought like his impressions were so funny. So Dana Carvey was a huge influence on me. And then ultimately from being a Dana Carvey fan, I watched his stand-up specials and cracked up. And I got to open for Dana finally about 2 years ago, and that was a cool moment for me. Like I wanted to tell him that story, but I also never want to be like a fanboy, you know?
Right.
So I was just like, oh yeah, it's cool, man. Just another weekend, you know?
What's it, the old line? It's like, work so hard till your heroes become your peers or something like that.
Dude,
that's so cool.
It's got to be tough in comedy too, because you open for probably so many of the guys that you looked up to, like with that, and then you kind of had to like, you don't want to go, you want to probably like try and form a friendship, but you don't want to like fanboy it out.
It's really hard, and sometimes you got to break your own rule. But I always feel like if you aren't the guy who the first 5 seconds you meet somebody, do you want to take the selfie and put it on social media? Is it more important to you to make it seem like you're friends with someone, or would you rather risk not getting that photo but actually becoming friends with that person? You know, actually having that respect and that mutual, you know, that become peers that respect each other. Like the coolest thing to me wasn't that Dana Carvey like knew how much I loved him as a kid. What was cool to me is that when I saw him 6 months later, I ran into him in a comic club, that he remembered my name, you know? And I'm like, oh, dude, if I had like fanboyed out, maybe he would have just forgot about me and filed me in with like everyone else who fanboys out about him, you know?
For sure. You've obviously, you know, mentioned some amazing names you've worked with, and some of the ones I mentioned in the intro. Who have been some of your favorites that you got to work with? Obviously, you're working with Bert right now.
Oh, yeah.
I had to
Bert's the
mention
best.
Lewis Black is my all-time favorite comedian. But what are some of the ones that kind of jump out to you when people mention your favorite comedians you've got to work with?
Well, Lewis is obviously, a nice guy. And he was cool to work with him. Lewis actually. So since we've been on the topic of festivals, the very first festival I went to was the Detroit Comedy Festival, and they had him host one of the shows, and the room was sold out. It's in this awesome club in Detroit, and so then he would introduce you, and you'd come out and you'd do your 8-minute set. And since the crowd was great, I had a killer set, and for $20 you could buy your set from the club. So I bought my set from the club, and then I used that video to apply for every other festival, and it was just the perfect video because Lewis Black is introducing you, comes out, shakes your hand, and then you crush for 8 minutes in this awesome crowd. It was the best. It was the best. It was one of the It was such a valuable tape to have early in my career. But I think that there's two answers to that. One answer is it's cool to open for people and get to meet people who you never would have thought you would have, like John Lovitz or someone like that, where I'm like, God, I remember being a kid and seeing him on movies, and now I'm like hanging out talking to him about dogs in a green room. You know what I mean? But also just guys that you end up realizing, like, oh, that's what a real comic is, like Ian Bagg, for example. I got to open for Ian Bagg a bunch when I was coming up in Florida, and watching Ian work the room was so interesting. You watch these guys, perform, and you hear their set every single show. It's mostly the same, but Ian, no two shows. And it's also cool because a lot of times you watch comics and the whole time you're like, oh, I wish I had wrote that. Oh, I wish I used to have a joke like that. Now I can't do it. But Ian, I'm like, he works. I don't know if you guys have ever seen him, but he's the best comic that works live because he works off the cuff so much. And he gives everyone a nickname, and he remembers them, and he's just so fast. And it's not my style, so it's just so fun to watch. Like, oh man, I'm just could be a fan and enjoy the show,
For sure.
So, Ian, I really like. Brian Regan, I've gotten a chance to meet a few times, but I never worked with him. But Brian is like the nicest dude on earth, and he was another guy who was like a hero of mine when I was younger, and just as a young comic too, just was always in awe. He's the only guy that I would ever like pay money to like go watch. Like, I would take my wife when we were dating, and we'd spend $60 to go watch him in a theater. Like, he was the guy that, like, when he came to town, I knew I was going to see him.
Yeah,
but I don't know, man. There's just been so many. I was really lucky that I was cut my teeth in South Florida, where they had 3 improv comedy clubs. So as an opening act there, I got to work with good comics. Where in some regions you have to work those B rooms and C rooms, and some do a great job of booking. Some just bring in road hacks, and so I've seen guys who are talented comics, but because they came up watching guys who weren't talented, then they didn't know that was where they were supposed to push themselves past,
For sure.
So, but me watching, Norm Macdonald come in one week, and Ian Bagg come in the next week, and Steve Byrne, and guys like Bert Kreischer, and every week you got those kind of guys. Sebastian Maniscalco and Bill Burr, when nobody knew who either of those dudes were. I was emceeing at the Improv, and I got to watch them, or I just popped down and would sit in the back of the room and watch them. And that's when nobody knew who they were, and now they sell out Madison Garden, and it's for a reason. It's because they're good at comedy.
Fun fact: me and Sebastian graduated from the same university.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah,
Where?
he went to NIU up in DeKalb. Right. Yeah.
Ooh, that's awesome.
I didn't know that. They sent out like an alumni letter when he had that special, and I was like, I mean, he's quite a bit older than me, but I'm like, get out of here! I had no idea.
That's cool.
Yeah.
We all know, like, the road, especially to being a comedian, is not easy. What were some of the, like, biggest hurdles that you had to go through? And, like, would you have done anything different?
Man, I mean, I think you need to be patient. I think a lot of people quit their day job too soon. There's nothing wrong with having a day job, and it takes the pressure off of just which shows you can and can't do, because you don't want to just be like, oh shoot, I got this gig, because I'll just take the gigs that are going to make you a better comic. And I don't know, what would I have done different? I have to think about that.
Yeah, no worry.
I would have paid more attention to how to edit video and how to be better on social media and things like that. I don't know if that's just generational, but I think that there's definitely a business side and of comedy apart from just being good at comedy. But if you at least just try to be good at comedy and be a cool person and hang around, then you'll catch up to all that stuff. You could fast track it by being a YouTube star. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up having the career you want to have, though.
Right, for sure. I think it's one of those, like you said, people quitting their day jobs. Like that's the great thing about comedy is that so much of it happens, outside of regular working hours, and you can.
It seems like most
do that.
comedians, it's a hobby at first, in a way, because it's so hard to make it your career right away.
If you don't enjoy it, or if it's not like a hobby and something you enjoy doing, then you'll drive yourself. It's not a smart plan to be like, I'm going to get into comedy for the money, because very few people end up making money at it. And it is a grind and a struggle to pay your bills doing it. But if you love doing it and it's what you want to do with your life, then who cares,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we can all come up with all the cliches and sports cliche analogies of, do what you love and you won't work a day, or, if you play a sport you love, then practice feels like, fun, all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah, definitely. You talk a lot about traveling and being on the road. How has COVID in the era that we're living in affected you guys traveling and getting out and being able to, because you weren't able to do shows for what, 3 months?
Yeah, at least.
If not more.
Yeah, so I was traveling, Bert a lot in January and February. I had a few of my own dates, but it was mostly stuff with Bert, January and February. And then when this shit happened in March and we had to shut it down, we were shut down, the end of March, April, May. And then I think it was sometime in June that we took that first little test run to go do a couple drive-in movie theaters. And I mean, the biggest difference, other than the fact we're playing at drive-in movie theaters instead of theaters or comedy clubs, is just the fact that we stay isolated. Bert's so awesome about wanting to hang out with his fans. And, I'm kind of like that too, man. I really like the reason why I ended up loving comedy as a passion was I was in the car business before. And, my family's been in the car business for generations. And I felt like I could go to work and I could spend all day in an office toiling away. And yes, I liked it a lot. Like there was a lot of adrenaline rushes of getting a sale or giving an employee like a great place to work and building bonds, like all that stuff's there. But more often than not, if someone came and knocked on your door, it's because they were upset, you know? So they're coming to bitch or complain or, tell you what you were doing wrong instead of saying, hey, thanks for establishing a good family business for the past several generations that treats people right. You know what I'm saying? Then I would, at the end of my shift, I would change my shirt in my office and I'd get in my car and I'd haul ass and I would go to the comedy club to MC, and 300 people after the show couldn't wait to shake our hand and say, hey man, you really made my day. Thank you so much for doing something I like doing. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I go, that sounds like a way I want to spend my life, So I have a lot of the same philosophy as Bert, and Bert's so awesome at this that even if he's tired, even if he just did 2 shows, he does everything he can to go out and have a beer with the fans after the show. He knows, or he stands there in a meet and greet line, takes a picture with all of them after a comedy club, So that's the biggest difference is that we can't mingle,
Yeah.
We go and we do our shows and then we got to go straight back to the bus. We have to stay isolated. And, if we get sick, then the rest of the tour gets called off. So we just can't take any chances.
Right.
But before, man, we would go, we'd do the show. He'd do pictures with everyone. He would tweet out or go on Instagram stories and say, we're going to whatever bar. Bunch of fans would meet us at that bar. He'd take pictures of people there. We'd let people buy us beers. We'd tell stories, really make people feel appreciated. And that was one of the coolest things. And I think that's the biggest difference.
Yeah, that's when I was told we went and saw this a comedian. He works at Barstool, and he was playing at Pheasant Run. And we went up there, and he after the bar, or after the show, he even just got on. He said, "Hey, we're going to the bar, across the lobby," and we went over there and had beers with him for a couple hours, and like
Yeah.
it makes that personal connection, and people, like you said, you might make someone's day just by sitting down and talking to them for 30 seconds or having a beer with them.
Was that Sean Latham or Tom
That was
McComas?
Sean Latham,
Sean?
yeah.
Yeah, those are good guys.
Yeah, he was funny, man, and he was a really good time at the bar. Really good. Probably like Bert gets to be, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Is social media a good or bad thing for comedians? And what I mean that is like, you know how Twitter and Facebook and the comments can get people take jokes so differently and like just love to get in the replies, the comments, or whatever. Sometimes is it hard to go between being a comedian and trying to go out on social media and like be funny?
So I'm gonna sound like an old man, like a curmudgeon talking about social media, but I think Bert, once again, is a good example of using social media in a positive way. And like he's a promotion machine, but he doesn't do it in a gross way. He does it in a creative way where it's like, oh man, that's such a funny video. And at the same time, he's tongue in cheek plugging his dates,
Yeah.
and he also gives people a real peek inside his life, so people really feel like they know him and it's authentic, but I think the gross part of social media is and I think the best example I could think of is like when I was coming up. So when I was like an open micer and then started emceeing and I was kind of at those beginning stages, we didn't have social, like if you post something on social media, you got like 3 likes, right? Like a lot of people weren't on it. But then like kind of I would say the generation after me a few years, that's when Facebook was blowing up. Like Base was around when I was coming up, so when Facebook was first kind of blowing up, I thought it was a real detriment to a lot of those comics who were coming up because they would write like just got a standing ovation at the Miami Improv during the open mic contest, and then all their relatives or their friends would be like, "Oh, you were always the funniest one in our family," and "Oh man, I knew you'd do it," and it was fake praise, it was too easy for them to get praise without actually earning it. You know what I mean? Whereas I felt like it helped me become a better comic where if I said some shit like that out loud to one of my buddies, like, "Hey man, I got a standing ovation at the Miami Improv last night," my buddy Forrest Shaw would say, "No, you didn't, bro. That doesn't happen. Nobody gets standing ovations at the Miami Improv. Oh, man, you're full of shit." Like, I heard it was terrible last night, work harder on jokes and that's how you're going to get your validation. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So I just feel like it gave people false sense of worth, which is dangerous.
Sure. And like obviously with like the current climate we live in here, like has it been more difficult recently to almost tiptoe those political correct lines for comedians, or is it like I know when someone says, "Oh, this is controversial," like, yeah, that's in a different setting, it's comedy, like it's meant to be as a joke. Like, is it more difficult, less difficult, same as it's always been to kind of tiptoe those lines?
Oh, the last 3 or 4 years have definitely been hard it was so funny because everyone was like, "Oh, you comedians must be glad that Trump won. Like, he's going to give you a lot of material." Like even Trump supporters were saying that because they were like, "He's a wacky dude. Like, buckle up, have fun with it." And then like a year later, they're like, "Don't make fun of Trump,"
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, my act's not really political anyways, so it didn't affect me as much. And maybe it was even an opportunity for me to like, because I do talk a little bit in my act now about like people being too sensitive and kind of being positive and appreciating things in life. Like I do talk about some of that coach shit, some of that same like platitude stuff that I have from my coaching DNA. I talk about in my act. So I do think that people appreciate that and they take it to heart more now than they might not have if we didn't have such a polarizing political climate. But I do think for political comics, it's definitely tougher. Like I had a joke about owning a handgun, and 5 or 6 years ago, that was like, one of my best bits I'd ever written. It was like it crushed everywhere. It was a unique spin on owning a handgun. I could not do that same bit now
I was listening to it today and I was like, this is such a good bit, but I could see how so many people would take this the wrong way.
That's TV shows, old TV shows. You look back and you're like, this can't happen now.
Oh, yeah, that I watched Flight of the Navigator on Disney Plus with my kids. I go, you guys are gonna. This is like a movie from my childhood. You're gonna love it. I go, it's a little hokey because it's Disney and it's a kids movie, but I'm like, you guys are gonna like it. And then we turned it on, and the first minute, one of the kids looks at his brother and goes, "Shut up, retard!" And I go, "Oh, you guys can't say that. You guys can't say that." Like, you know, exactly. Like, Dad, I thought you said this was gonna be hokey. So
not dropping hard R words out here.
Yeah. Hey, look, man, things are always going to change in the world. You're always going to have to adjust to different like areas of the country or different types of gigs, but you just got to be strong enough to read your audience. And, you know, if the only way you can be funny is by being politically shocking, or if the only way you can be funny is by being totally raunchy, then maybe you're not good enough for certain things, you know, just find your niche and stick with that. But you know, you're not like an overall great comic, I guess, if you can't adjust a little bit. Or nothing wrong with being unapologetic and just being you and letting your fans find you, kind of like Doug Stanhope, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Outside of comedy, what do you like? I know I listened to one of your podcasts, you like to golf and stuff like that. What do you like to do outside of comedy?
Well, I mean, I was telling you guys before we started recording, I coach high school water polo. I have a water polo podcast with Tony Azevedo, who's like the Michael Jordan of USA water polo. He's been to 5 Olympics. You know, he's been like one of the best players in the world since he was 18 years old, and he just retired. So now I talked him into doing a podcast. You know, I love sports. I'm a big sports fan. So either coaching, playing, or you know, watching sports. Yeah, golf is definitely something I wish I was better at, but I really enjoy. And now my kids, I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they're at the age, so it's fun to go watch them play sports. And I coach one of my kids in water polo. I you know, go watch a shit ton of soccer games. I take them surfing, you know, stuff like that, or I take them to play golf. So, you know, being a dad is definitely up there. And then barbecue is the other thing. I have a barbecue podcast too. So my life is, you know, coaching water polo and sports, comedy, and barbecue. And then my family's kind of intertwined between those 3 things. That's literally the triangle of Dave Williamson's life right there.
That's awesome.
We love barbecue, and now like I was listening to Meet Dave.
Yeah.
That food, oh my, everything just looks amazing. I love barbecue.
So my podcast is a huge scam, bro. What I do is when I go, well, first of all, I decided to do it because I didn't have a podcast at the time. And I'm like, I should get another podcast going. It's been a while since I've had a podcast. And I go to the comedy club here in LA, and I go hang out. And normally you have the same conversations over and over again. You run into some friend you haven't seen in a while. They're like, dude, you going up tonight? No, I just came to hang out. Oh, cool. Yeah, I went up earlier. How was the crowd? Crowd was good. You on the road? Yeah, I got gigs next week. And you just talk comedy, right?
Yeah.
Well, I started noticing I'd show up, talk about hobbies. Like just barbecue was just my hobby that just like has blown up into like my identity now, you know? So I go to the club to hang out, and the first thing anyone wants to talk to me about is, dude, I saw those ribs that you put on Instagram yesterday. How do you cook those? When can I come over? How long does it take? Where do you buy them from? You know, like that's all anyone wants. And I'm like, if people want to hear me talk barbecue, I should just do a podcast and you know, talk barbecue. This is why it's a scam. What I started doing was I'd go on the road, and since I was on the road, you know, I use that as an opportunity to reach out and record an episode. So I'd reach out to whoever the best barbecue guy was in Chicago or, you know, Charlotte or wherever I was, Boston. And I'd message him and I'd say, hey, man, I'm a comedian. I'm in town. If you want tickets to the show, I'd love to have you as a guest. But I'd really like to come grab some lunch and talk to you about barbecue for my podcast. You know, comedians are all jaded to doing podcasts by now. You know, like comedians have been doing comedy podcasts for over a decade now. So they're like, oh, another podcast. But barbecue guys, a lot of people don't show them love. So they're like, oh, you want to talk about my barbecue? I'd love to talk barbecue with you. So I'd show up. I'd get my lunch for free because they just want to, like, you know, treat me as a guest at that point. Yeah. I'd sit there and I'd shoot the shit with these guys that I look up to because pitmasters are truly, we were talking earlier about not being starstruck. I don't get starstruck with comedians, but pitmasters are my heroes, right? I really look up to them. So I get to sit and I talk to them for an hour. I would have been eating lunch by myself half the time on the road. So now I get to somebody, and then they normally load me up with another tray. If I happen to be with Bird or with other comedian, they'd be like, take this back to the tour bus. And I'm like, man, this formula really works.
That's a hell of a scam. I love it. That's genius.
When I was in Chicago, we were working the Chicago theater, and I Googled barbecue places in Chicago, and one of the top search results was a place called I think it's just called Q. I think it's just called Q.
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah. So I looked it up, and the guy who owns the restaurant is Chef Art Smith, who was Oprah's personal chef for like 10 years. He's cooked for the Obamas. He's toured with Michelle Obama doing stage shows. He's been on every, TV show, New York bestseller. The guy's, really well known. So I messaged him on Instagram. Hey, I'm opening up for a comedian named Bert Kreischer at the Chicago Theater. I'd love to come down, interview, and try some of your barbecue if that's cool. Guy writes me back, says, I live in Florida, actually, but I happen to be flying into Chicago right now to meet with some people. If you want to meet me before them, come down to the restaurant at 6:00. Done. I go down, I start researching who the guy is. I'm like, holy shit, this guy's like really famous.
Yeah.
Well, I go down and I have dinner with Art Smith. We end up hitting it off. We're still buddies. I text him every now and then. And, he gave me like $200 worth of barbecue to take back to the bus, the Burt and everything. And I'm like, dude, it's just such an awesome way to connect with people and share a passion, I guess,
Well, it goes back to what you're saying about even find your niche. And it sounds like you've done a great job at finding your niche in the barbecue community.
Oh, dude. It's fun for me how it intertwines, like I coach high school, like water polo, like I said, and everyone knows that like for our home tournament, I'm going to cook pulled pork sandwiches and sell them for our fundraiser, and the kids know at the end of the year, like they talk me into like cooking ribs and bringing them in, and it's like how we connect. And same, like I was telling you with comedy, it's how we connect. So it's for me, it's fun when the worlds all collide.
100%.
And it's a good way to get asked back on tours and stuff. Like, this the guy who likes to make the food.
Dude, absolutely.
That's just like you said. You always need that guy. Always want that guy that can just make just amazing food. Because a guy like me, I cannot cook at all, and that just a guy that could. Oh, that's because the food I always see on Bert's Instagram story. Sometimes the food that you make, it looks amazing.
It's getting late here. Zach's gonna have to eat again tonight. Just thinking about all the food that we're talking about.
Yeah, man. No, I've definitely made myself. There's a lot of funny people out there, so Bert could take a lot of people on tour with him, But I've definitely made myself a little, more valuable by being able to throw a brisket in a travel smoker on a loading dock outside of a theater and pull off, some amazing brisket in difficult conditions that we could chow down on. And even more so importantly now, that's one of the things that's changed a lot with COVID as well, is normally we would do 3 or 4 days of touring, and then we would fly home, and maybe I'd cook once or twice just for fun while we were there. Well, now we're trying to avoid restaurants, and we have to be out on tour for like 3 weeks at a time because we don't want to fly back and forth. So you can only eat out so much and not be unhealthy. So now we're cooking every day. We're making salads. We're cooking, asparagus in a cast iron skillet. I build these like makeshift grills, and I'm cooking burgers or steaks or beef ribs or pork ribs or pulled pork or brisket in the smoker. And we're just cooking every day now,
That's so cool.
That's
awesome. Like you said, there's a good amount of comedians Bert could get his hands on, but none that can make a brisket in a parking lot, I would assume.
Dude, we were in San Antonio 2 weeks ago, and the show was actually not at a drive-in movie theater. It was at the San Antonio Spurs arena. Mm-hmm. So like the concourse, like the courtyard that normally would like be butted up against the arena, they put 100 picnic tables out there and socially distanced. So you would have to buy a picnic table. So you would only be sitting with people in your like quarantine circle, right? Mm-hmm. And then they built a big, awesome stage. And so that's where we performed. So we had the San Antonio Spurs arena, the courtyard with this awesome crowd, the stage, the tour bus, And then me right here next to the tour bus behind the stage, I cooked a 25-pound Wagyu Kobe Master Beef, Master Kobe, score 9, which is the highest score from Australia, brisket. It barely fit into the travel smoker. And it was maybe the best brisket I've ever cooked in my career as a pitmaster here. I mean, it came out awesome.
Oh,
and
my God.
you know, it was definitely a fun night of just being like this like iconic hunk of beef. It was a $250 hunk of beef that, you know, and that's with my discount that I get. And just like seeing the Spurs arena right there with like the limelight. And you know, the other thing, since it was a sports podcast, what we've gotten into and talking about that night reminds me, because we played until about 3 a.m. that night. We got into pickleball.
Oh, yeah, pickleball's great.
I've seen that.
We play it in PE with the kids all the time.
Well, I'd love to know the real rules if you want to ever teach me.
I don't think anybody knows the real rules, man.
Because we make it up as we go. But we bought a pickleball net at a sporting goods store and some rackets, and now we just set it up wherever we're at. Oh, we play almost every day. And we'll either play during the day or we'll play at night after our show for Ron to show up and pull the bus out. And we just draw lines on the ground with chalk, and we just go to town. $50 a game, just go.
That's so cool.
You say like you missed the aspect of going out and stuff, but it seems like you guys are like, you're all good friends and stuff. That seems like you guys are just coming together more. And like you said, you can't go out.
And you're never going to get those kinds of opportunities like that again. You know, you're creating memories of something that is literally never going to happen.
Yeah, it's a blast, dude, for sure. Dude, I thought this is crazy. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm just saying it for context because I think it's fucking nuts. But, you know, because of Bert, you know, I've been able to work during this. If it wasn't for Bert having this idea and being who he is and in the position in his career to implement it, there's no way I'd be, you know, performing right now. But I added up the shows, and I've done a few more shows than Bert has, because I did another show here in LA that the Irvine Improv put on, and there was a couple nights on tour that I performed, and then lightning hit, so then Bert never got to perform that night. So I'm a few sets ahead of Bert in 2020. So with that said, there's a chance that I've done more live sets in front of an audience than any other comedian in 2020 in the world.
That's amazing. You got to get
about a stat, dude. That's a stat right there.
That is 100%. That's got to go on a plaque in the office or something, man. That's great. Is there like, you said you guys are still, you know, you're getting ready to head out. Are you doing more things like this, like you said in San Antonio, doing the outside stuff still? Is that what the plan is here?
So we only have a couple more dates. We're doing San Fran and another little area up around San Fran this weekend. And then we have like one random like Reno gig and a San Diego gig. And I think those are like kind of alternate venues. I think one of them's actually a theater at a casino, but they're like trying it out to see if they can like socially distance the people, you know? And then, yeah, I think the others are kind of alternate venues too. So yeah. And then I think because of winter and because we've played every market, I think that Bert's shutting it down touring wise anyways for a couple months until the summer.
For sure. Well, before we let you go, like I said, I was listening to some of your albums. I got a couple follow-ups. Have you taken your son to any more Miami University games since his Wake Forest incident?
My son, one of my favorite things was taking him. My oldest son really loves sports. My younger son's into, you know, more like fishing and stuff like that, you know. But my older son loves team sports and being a fan. So the bit you're alluding to, that's, you know, on the subject of like trying to make it as a comedian, this is actually a good tale that's got a little bit of a message to it. Because I remember that day, and I don't tell this part in the story, but I was like, man, I got some big shows coming up. I got to sit down and write some new jokes. And I sat on my computer and I stared at the computer screen and I couldn't come up with shit, right? And then my uncle called me. My uncle had University of Miami basketball tickets, and we were living in Miami at the time, and my father-in-law happened to be visiting. So my uncle called me up and said, hey, do you want to take your father-in-law to University of Miami game? I got some really good tickets. I go, you know what? I'm not doing anything by writing anyway. So yeah, let me just go. So I took the tickets. My son was like 5 or 6 or something at the time, right? And I took him and his buddy and my father-in-law to the UM game, and they were playing Wake Forest. And the way the bit goes is, when we'd watch sports with my son, the way he would be to follow it is I'd have to tell him like, the guys in this color jerseys are the good guys, and that color jerseys are the bad guys. And that's he's like, got it, good guys, bad guys, good guys, bad guys. So we're sitting there watching the game, and Wake Forest was wearing their all black road jerseys, and my son stands up on his chair and yells, "We don't like the black guys." And I'm telling you, you can hear a pin drop in that arena. Like he said it in one of those moments when like, when like everyone was quiet. And so I had a back and forth with him about it, like, trying to teach him not to say things that sound racist, and but it's a real life thing that happened, and then you exaggerate it and you turn it into a bit. And I go, man, if I had sat home and stared at my computer screen, I would have never come up with something as real and as unique as what happened to me in real life by just going out and living real life and paying attention while I was doing it,
Absolutely. Sometimes life just writes those jokes for you, instead of.
That's what comedy seems like, is you're just living life and you're just telling the story of it.
Oh, dude, I have so many sports related funny stories from growing up in Miami too that I haven't even put on stage yet, but definitely could be bits easy enough. My best friend was the Miami Heat mascot, Bernie. And so he used to get us free tickets to go all the time. So, I was best friends with his girlfriend at the time too. And so he called us up one time and goes, "Hey, do you guys want to come to the game tonight?" We go, "Yeah." And it was happened to be like around Halloween, right? So everyone was dressing up to go to the game. So my parents had just come back from a trip a few months earlier in like Europe, or I'm sorry, not Europe, like Egypt or somewhere in the Middle East. I don't know, remember they went, but my mom bought like this authentic like headdress and a robe from there, whatever. So we needed to come up with some last minute Halloween costumes. So I told my friend Kristen, I go, "Oh, my mom just got these. Let's wear these." So we wore them. She had like this like, veil thing or whatever. So we go. But what I didn't think about was this was the October after September 11th.
Oh,
so it was like a month and a half after September 11th happened, So we're there, and the people were so ignorant at the time. They didn't know the difference between like wearing like Egyptian garb and Middle Eastern garb.
Yeah.
So these idiots were like, dude, we got like shit thrown at us, and people were like, "You think that's funny, boy, dressing up like that?" Like disrespecting America. I'm like, no, I swear to God, it's not what I didn't do this on purpose. You know what I mean?
Oh my God. I never even thought of that. That is wild. Last one before we let you go. Do you ever miss the car dealership?
I mean, I miss being a part of a family business, and I do miss business in general. The adrenaline rush of making a deal, when you can make a good deal for the dealership and also make a customer very happy in the same time, impacting someone's life, either whether it's as a manager and giving it's a lot like coaching. You do the coaching meetings on Friday and you pump up your sales staff, and I miss that stuff. But I'm not a big car guy. I don't miss the cars like specifically. And I've found ways in comedy to exercise that part of my brain. So like I produce a comedy festival here in El Segundo. So every year the Gundo Comedy Festival, I put on a little comedy fest, and it's the same mental exercises that you do when you're delegating in trying to pump up a team and customer service and pushing yourself every year. It's all those same lessons that I learned in the car business. So that's the part I miss, is the people part of it, and I get that in other ways now.
For sure. And last question, being you're from Miami, will the U ever be back?
Oh man. Yes, they will. The U will be back.
I love the confidence.
I think I like our offensive coordinator. It's tougher now. It's tougher.
Yes,
Because
100%.
the reason why the U was so great back then is because maybe other than a pocket in Texas, South Florida was the richest bed for high school talent coming up, right? I played high school football I quit after my sophomore year because I got tired of getting the shit beat out of me by these all-American dudes, even on my own team. You know what I'm talking about? Like in practice. So I switched to water polo, where it was a physical sport, but the water's a little bit more, of a level playing ground for a slow guy like me. But it was harder to recruit out of your area back then. So, University of Miami, you got Jimmy Johnson in there and who knew how to like really attract that home talent. Your family could watch you play on TV super easy, or watch you play on the internet, or, hop in a jet and go to Oregon, or you see the Oregon Ducks with their awesome uniforms. And as a kid, you go, I want to go play for them, instead of being a kid growing up in the neighborhood, seeing like, so it's tougher, but they have an amazing legacy. They have an amazing alumni base. It's a great university. It's a private school. So, the thing that's holding us back right now is that we don't have a stadium that's ours. We play in the Dolphins Stadium, and it's not a college atmosphere. And I think that hurts them. The Orange Bowl was incredible. It was a piece of shit that you felt like it was going to fall apart any moment while you were there watching a game, but it was magic. Teams would go in there and they would shit their pants at the level of noise, and people would stomp their feet, and the whole stadium sounded like it was going to fall apart. So it was a true home field. I remember going to many games when we had a 58 game home winning streak that was a record at the time, and it was just, we could not get beat. It was incredible.
Didn't matter who it was, man. That's one of my all-time favorite 30 for 30s was the one on the U. And I'm a Florida Gator fan, and I still love that. So
awesome documentary. Billy Corbin did that documentary. He's a great dude who's comes out to lots of comedy shows. He's a big supporter of comedians. And he did the U2, Cocaine Cowboys. And he just did a new one about 538 votes, or I think it's called, about the Bush and Gore election. And anything with Billy Corbin, you guys should watch, man. He's an awesome documentarian.
Absolutely. I'd love it. I'm going to have to check those out.
He did one about steroids. I can't remember what it's called, too, with Alex Rodriguez and the steroid scandal.
The Balto ring.
Yeah. That's another good one for sports fans to watch.
That's definitely going to make it to my list. But Dave, thank you so much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure. Best of luck on the road. Make sure you find Dave at DaveWilliamsonComedy.com, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, literally everywhere. Spotify. I'm sure you got stuff on iTunes. I'm a Spotify guy, so.
Yeah, at Dave W Comedy is my Instagram. And I've got 2 albums out. My most recent one is here it is. It's called Trying My Hardest. It's got a Miami Vice looking cover on it, and this is the one that's got that Miami Heat story on it. And I got a lot more actual sports stories that we could talk next time we get together, guys. So I'll come back on another time, and I'll tell you, now that we got all the like getting to know Dave stuff out of the way, I could go an hour telling you just funny sports stories for sure.
Cannot wait. But everybody, make sure you check out Dave Williamson Comedy, all of his socials. Check out his albums. Trust me, I listened to him this week. You're going to love him. Make sure you check him out. Dave, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thank you.
You got it, guys. Anytime. Appreciate you asking me.